Hi, and welcome to our divine home. Today I will be making this maple apple pie with sourdough crust. If you'd like to know how I did it, please stick around. Okay, we're going to start off making a sourdough discard crust. First, add 360 grams of organic all-purpose flour. And then we're going to add 5 grams of salt. And then we'll just whisk that together until it's fully incorporated. Next, we're going to add 240 grams of sourdough discard. Then 30 grams of apple cider vinegar. And 15 grams of maple syrup. Nice. Thank you. And then last, we're gonna add a full cup of shaved cold butter. I just used a cheese grater to grate the butter. Add that in. And that should be about 215 grams of butter. Okay, and then I'm gonna mix this with my hands until it's just barely incorporated. I don't wanna melt the butter. And then I'm gonna separate it into 2 separate doughs and form a disc. And then I'm going to place those discs in plastic wrap and put them in the fridge for at least 12 hours overnight. All right, then once you have the dough fully incorporated, go ahead and split that into 2 evenly. That wasn't very even. It looks like a brain. And then you'll form each half into a disc. And the dough should look just a little bit dry. You want that because you don't want the butter to melt. All right, after you have your 2 discs formed, go ahead and wrap them up in a plastic wrap. Okay, once you have them wrapped up, we'll go ahead and put them in the fridge. I like to put mine in there for at least overnight, at least 12 hours. You can leave them in the fridge up to 3 days, but by then I would probably toss them or use them. Okay, it is now 2 days later, and I'm going to start making the filling. What I'm going to do first is these are fresh apples off the tree, so I'm going to de-stem them, I'm going to wash them, peel them, and then I'm going to cut them up. Alright, now that I have them all washed, I thought I would show you how I peel them. Actually, it's how my grandpa showed me. So you take the knife and you're going to cut towards yourself, which is not generally recommended. Actually, when my sister was little, she was trying to cut an apple and cut through her hand, and we had to go to the hospital. So anyway, be very careful. So you'll take it like this, and you're going to cut towards yourself, cut into the skin. Just like that. So again, you'll get a good grip on the apple. You're just going to cut in towards yourself. And just keep that going all the way around. Growing up, we actually did have an apple peeler, like the one where you stick it on the side of the counter and you turn it and it peels the whole apple. But my grandpa still chose to do it this way. I grew up in my grandparents' house, and we had 2 apple trees, so he would make apple pie all the time, and so it's a very nostalgic thing. And these apples, my sister-in-law got from her boss off of her tree, and they're very similar to the ones that I grew up with, and it just brings back a lot of good memories with my grandpa. Actually, speaking of memories with my grandpa, there was one time when my grandpa had me go up into one of the apple trees and shake the branches so that some of the apples would fall off the tree, and then he could pick them up. Well, I got up there, and after it was all done, he actually removed the ladder. He took it and he put it away behind the shed, and then he started to walk inside, and I was like, "What are you doing? Like, I need to get down." And he said, "You can jump down, right?" And I waited for what felt like an eternity, and he did not come back outside. Like, he had gone back inside and was not coming back out. So I finally was like, okay, I guess I'm gonna have to jump. And I was maybe like 7 or 8 at the time. Was I even that old? I don't know. I was pretty young. So what seemed to be like 100-foot drop for me was really only like 10 feet. And to my grandpa, that's like, he was 6'4", I believe. So that was nothing. Anyway, I did finally get the courage to jump down and it was fine, but he was not coming back for me. Anyway, he always made apple pies from scratch, and his were very simple. The pies, my mom said, for the crust, he would just get a handful of flour and then get a handful of cold butter and just not work it in, but just until it was just crumbly, or just enough butter that it was crumbly, and then he would press that into a pan and call that the pie crust. He would use a little bit of cold water, she said. He'd sprinkle in a little cold water until it was pie crust material. And then for the filling, he would just wash them and then peel them like I am now, and then he would add sugar and I think possibly flour, but it was very, very simple, right? And then he'd just bake that, and very nostalgic. They were good. Anyway, this recipe is a little bit more complicated with the sourdough. I have an autoimmune disease, which makes it so my joints get really inflamed, and so I try to not eat inflammatory foods, and every once in a while I want sweets, and so this is one of the ways I can do sweets where it's not too processed. I mean, obviously I am using all-purpose flour, so that is a little bit more processed, but as a treat every now and then, I don't think it's too bad, and then I try to use a little bit less sugar in these recipes. It's kind of interesting where this apple, where apples normally would like turn brown, this one's turning red. I don't think I've ever noticed that before. Interesting. See, and this apple hasn't at all. I wonder why. Okay, and I like to cut up my apple into thin slices like this. You can cube it too if you like. I just prefer the slices. Alright, so I've finished peeling and slicing all of my apples. So now we are going to put together the filling. So first things first, I'm going to throw in all my apples. Looks like I have about 950 grams, or about 2 pounds of apples. And then we are going to add 30 grams of maple syrup, and then about 5 grams of vanilla, 10 grams of cinnamon, and 40 grams of flour. All right, then I'm gonna mix all of this up, and then I'm gonna go throw it on medium-low heat until it starts to caramelize. All right, so while we have the filling cooling in the fridge, I'm gonna start rolling out the dough. All right, first I'm gonna flour the rolling pin and the counter pretty well. All right, and then I'll just start rolling it out into a circle as best as I can. Okay, starting to stick, so I'm just gonna flour this one more time. Okay, and then we're gonna put it into our pie dish. And I saw somebody do this online, and I thought I have to try it. So we'll see if it actually works. Get some of that flour off. Now that I have that done, just kind of pressing in the edges, and then I'm going to cut the excess off. Alright, and then I'm just going to use a knife to trim the excess off. Alright, so that turned out perfect, to be the perfect size for a pretty deep pie plate. And then what I'm going to do is cover this up and throw it back into the fridge for just a minute. All right, and then I'm just gonna reflour my surface and get rolling on the second one. All right, so we're gonna do a basket weave crust. So what I'm doing is just cutting it into strips that we can use to weave on top. All right, now I'm gonna pull out the pie pan with the dough in it as well as the filling and get the filling in there. All right, now I'm just gonna be putting the filling into the crust. And now that I have the filling in there, I'm gonna start weaving these strips on top. All right, now that I'm finished with the basket weave, I'm gonna cut off all of the excess crust. And now that we've got all of the excess off, I'm gonna start pressing the edges with a fork. All right, and that just created a little bit more excess, so I'm gonna go ahead and trim that off. All right, now that we're all finished with that, I'm going to cover this up one more time, put it back in the fridge, and then I'm gonna start preheating the oven. And then while the oven preheats, I'm going to make an egg wash so that we can put that on top. All right, so I just threw the pie back into the fridge while I allowed the oven to preheat. I set it to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. And while I'm waiting for that, I'm going to prepare an egg wash. And I'm also going to use the extra pie trimmings and I'm going to make little tarts. All right, so for the rest of this dough, I'm just going to press it back into a ball and then I'm gonna roll it out. And how many tarts you're able to make out of this really is just going to depend on how much dough you have left. But I like to try to roll it out just into a nice rectangle. And then you're just going to cut that rectangle into a few other long rectangles. Doesn't have to be perfect. And then I'm going to go wash my hands real quick. And then what I do is I just take like a jam. This is organic raspberry spread from Costco. And I just scoop out a good spoonful or two and spread it out just on 1/2 of the tart. Try not to get it onto the edges. Then I'm just going to fold these over and stamp in the edges again with my fork. And then I'm going to quickly whisk up our egg wash. It's literally just 1 egg. I'll whisk it really well. All right, and now my oven is done preheating. So I've gone ahead and I've pulled out my apple pie here. And I am just going to lightly brush a little bit of this egg wash on every inch of this crust. All right, now I'm going to throw this in the oven, and then after about 15 minutes, I'm going to turn it down to 350, and then we're going to leave it in there for about an hour. Now, while that is baking, I'm going to go ahead and throw these just into a lined baking sheet. And then I'm going to cut just some small holes into the top of these. And I just did a little cross hatch pattern. Now that I have them in the pan and they've got a couple of slits in them, I'm gonna go ahead and throw some egg wash on top. I'm gonna go ahead and throw some plastic wrap on this and throw it in the fridge while the pie bakes. And then after the pies finish, we'll bake these up. All right, it's been 15 minutes. I just pulled this out of the oven and I've turned it down to 350 degrees. And then I've just added tinfoil to the edges so that they don't burn. Now it's gonna go back into the oven for an hour on 350. It's come out perfectly. I'm just gonna let this rest. I'll probably put some plastic wrap on it, put it in the fridge, and then cut into it tomorrow. I also just popped these in the oven right after the pie finished baking. These only bake about 30 minutes and then they're done. You can eat them right away. Alright, so this is the next day. I left it in the fridge overnight to set up so it didn't end up with a runny filling. It came out perfectly. It wasn't runny at all, it was a huge hit with my family, and it didn't last more than a few days. I want to thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.